If you suffer from claustrophobia, this is probably not a good video for you. In New Mexico, there is a very deep body of water called the Blue Hole that formed after this huge sinkhole filled with water. But at the bottom of the Blue Hole, 84 feet down, there is this little tiny opening that almost looks like the drain at the bottom of your bathtub, except it's just big enough that a grown person with scuba tanks on could wriggle through it. And if they did, they'd be entering into a vast network of tunnels and caves that have never been mapped, and many of them have never been explored. Fast forward to 2016, and an elite diving organization called the ADM Exploration Foundation that literally goes around the world exploring unmapped caves and professionally maps them. They reached out to the owners of the Blue Hole Cave and said, hey, we'd be happy to map out your forbidden section. And the owners granted them permission. So this would be the first time in 40 years that anyone had been in the deepest section of the Blue Hole. One of the divers that was going to be on this excursion was a guy named Shane Thompson. He had been a diving instructor for the United States Navy before becoming an advanced scuba instructor in San Diego. Shane had actually been told to stay on land as a safety standby diver, while another diver named Mike Young was going to be the first into the cave and would just explore the upper section. But as soon as Mike Young got in the water that morning, a couple minutes later, Shane was in the water after him. And so Shane and Mike continued down to the entrance. Shane would be the first one to wriggle his way through this very claustrophobia-inducing entrance. Once he was through, Mike followed after him, and at this point, it's pitch black. So they both got their high-powered flashlights out, and immediately as they're kicking it out down the tunnel, they realize there's a lot of silt, and so their lights aren't really that good. It would be like driving in really intense fog and turning on your high beams. That's not going to do anything. You're just going to illuminate the fog around you. So they just slowly made their way forward before Shane identified a tunnel that kind of branched off to the right, and they can see there is an opening at the end of this tunnel, maybe 20, 30 feet down, that appears to open up into a much larger cavern. Shane takes off first, Mike follows him, and as they're getting closer and closer to what they think is going to be this huge cavern, they actually suddenly get stuck. Shane gets stuck first, Mike comes up alongside him because it's so silty he can't see. Mike stays calm and begins to push himself backwards to just retreat out of the situation he is in. While Shane, in a total panic, instead of coming backwards towards Mike, begins going forward through this tiny little narrow opening and somehow manages to force himself into this chamber. Mike has retreated back out to the main hallway and he's just waiting for Shane to do the same thing. But when he never shows up, Mike goes back down the tunnel, he goes right up to the little entrance into this cavern and he pokes his head in and he scans the light around and he doesn't see Shane anywhere, but he sees right away that there's all these different exits into different tunnels that shoot all over this cavern. And so he takes a deep breath and he begins forcing himself through this tiny little hole. But once he was through, he pointed his light up and he looked for the biggest opening to one of those tunnels and he began swimming up after Shane. He manages to get to the end and it's a dead end, and curled up at the very back of the dead end was Shane. His mouthpiece was out and he was deceased. After Shane's body was recovered, they resealed the forbidden section, and to this day, no one is allowed to go in again.